Welcome to the Abnormal Psych Podcast, a deep dive into psychology, culture, and entertainment. With your hosts, Sean Prober and Marley Morrow.
Now today we're going to be talking about kind of, in the theme of the show recently, we brought up things that have been taught to us and have been incorrect. And maybe nothing is more incorrect than most of our conception of how old civilization is. Kind of growing up, I always thought about cavemen and very much in the thing of the Flintstones. I guess the Flintstones were most of my information was coming from at that point. But you think, okay, back then you have some people in caves and they're hardly human and they kind of keep going, and gradually build up in civilization.
Did we even live in caves? Like, I know that their Neanderthals did, but did the Homo sapiens?
I'm not sure, in a pinch.
Like maybe some did, but like this whole idea of cavemen, I think, is more like what we thought of as early humans is more of like the Neanderthal.
Yeah, when people have looked back on 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, there was no society possible. There is that. So the ancient Egyptian civilization was about 3150 BC. And when we look back at kind of Mesopotamia, that was a few hundred years before that, 3500 BC to 500. And every child is taught in school that Mesopotamia is the birthplace, and they drill in the definition, the birthplace of civilization, and blah, blah. But now, just even...
The Fertile Crescent.
It's all just BS. Like, it's total BS. So, you have in Israel in 2019, they discovered a city that was maybe between 6,000 and 7,000 years old. It was called the New York of that time. And it was huge, and obviously many people, little tight squares of concrete, and tight quarters that were clear than a bunch of different people, and all these ancient kind of artifacts coming from that. Just the other day in Gaza, you saw this quote-unquote goddess. It was called the goddess in all the articles, and it was this very pretty-looking head that was carved out of stone in this kind of way.
Like a warrior goddess, right?
Mm-hmm. And that was from around 5,000 years ago. So we have these really advanced societies that were living together peacefully and coexisting. It's amazing what happened to this planet that all of a sudden it just fell into just this darkness, this weird, creepy, gothic darkness.
Yeah, with like rising populations, you see plagues wipe out complete cities, and when most of the people are living in there, it takes a while to build the populations back up. But with all these like historical facts that we have, people in like the, what am I trying to say? Like the material that we're all made out of, it's really hard to find evidence of humans and things like that if you don't have like bones.
Yeah, a lot of it kind of goes away. You end up with their what they leave behind.
Exactly. And how many different civilizations used to like burn their dead and all these things. It's very hard to find good evidence, and it's buried under all these things and maybe have been destroyed earlier. So, I mean, history is not as easy. Like, nothing that we learn about is as easy as what you think. Like, dating something with the carbon dating and all of that.
Yeah, but it's dangerous to be so arrogant about actually knowing. I think now, as technology improves and science increases, you're seeing so many more of these kind of discoveries. It seems like every day you're pulling something out from 5,000-6,000 years ago. And that just wasn't the case. And it makes you wonder that if you go deeper than that, what the heck are you going to find?
Yeah.
The weird part of this, or maybe the interesting part of it, is that you kind of have this idea that civilization and science and art has been a progression where you've gone upward. And it kind of slowly goes up.
You just
and
keep
up.
adding more knowledge.
It just keeps getting better. But it shows the fragility of that.
That's why they always say, like, if you don't learn about history, we're going to repeat it. But the issue is, how do we know our history when the people in control what information was kept? You know, like what records were kept, what things were hidden, what things were told and, kept in the books that were taught to people.
Yeah. If you really think about it for a thought experiment, I think it's really easy to imagine that if your government didn't want you to know a history of something, that you may very well not know it. I think, as a practical example, in North Korea, I think there's a lot of history that those people know or don't know.
Yeah.
That isn't objectively true.
Anybody who's seen a documentary about North Korea, it's just shocking. Like, they don't even have words to make them able to protest the government. They don't even have those words, and they believe their rulers are actual gods. And I believe they think they won a war against us.
Yeah.
And that, like, the world is, like, destroyed outside of North Korea. So they're suffering, but they're not all trying to escape and stuff because they think the rest of the world is like an apocalypse.
Yeah, it's like The Village.
Yeah. Like, you think this is bad. Wait until you see the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's completely in disarray and just demons walking around. But now, we've been talking about North Korea forever, and that kind of goes to the other point that we were going to talk about today, which is, I guess we'll call it news fatigue.
The psychology of the news cycle.
Yeah. And we see examples of this where we kind of fixate on something. The public fixates on a topic, and then all of a sudden it's gone, and it's replaced. And that's just this human tendency that we get kind of bored. In North Korea, they're no less ridiculous than they were 10 years ago, maybe more so. But we've had the public kind of inundated with North Korean info, and it's almost, what do they call it when you get the little toxic, like a snake bite? You become immune to it with slow doses of poison. But yeah, you hear about it all the time. And the Kim family's crazy, and they did this, and they fed somebody to boars. What could you hear? Could you hear on Tuesday that somebody fed somebody else to boars? What on Wednesday would shock you? So when they fire off a missile, now I've been hearing for 20 years that North Korea's fired off a missile. How many times are you going to get alarmed by it? And then one day it's very possible that they're going to launch a missile and it's going to kill hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people.
And maybe that's why they keep allowing these stories to be told, where it's like, oh, what is North Korea going to do? Because people will be so like, oh, they're not going to do anything. And then that's the time that they do bomb us, and we're not prepared because of that.
Yeah, it's like the boy who cried wolf, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, news and journalism is a really important part of America, with free speech and being able to check the other parts of the government and things like that. But to pretend that they're not being run by people trying to make a buck is, ridiculous. Yeah. Everybody cares about making money. And we've seen that with our own blogs, that people want negative. That people want, like, horrible stories, like, whatever horrible thing happened. And we all think that we want, like, positive messages and stuff, but that's not what really grabs your attention. It's like these negative events. And once you've been hearing about Russia, and I mean, all the horrible things they've done to people, like, I was like in tears for like at least the first couple weeks. Every time I would hear these stories, but then eventually you're just like, every day it's the same thing. Like how long can you be like sad every
We saw
day?
it with Iraq with like people body bags coming back.
Yeah,
And
or
so,
Syria.
Yeah, yes, you do it all the time, and then eventually the public just doesn't want it anymore, and
It's not shocking enough anymore.
and it doesn't make it any less important, which is the dangerous part. So it's still as important, it's as pressing, but the public just doesn't care anymore about it to read up and stay informed on it.
Exactly.
So it's a real danger with overexposure. Maybe when they just watched the television show or got the newspaper every day, it took less. But
Yeah, that's true. And they like were more like actively trying to find information because they didn't have it everywhere. Like when the information is constantly being thrown at you, you're like, ah.
it's wild to think about that your ignorance of now on so many issues, and we do have a phone that's capable of pulling up all the information that we would ever need to be right. And like it's right there. You can just.
But do we? Because what do we know is right and wrong?
Yeah.
Like, as I believe, like at least I choose to trust the government for most things, just because like what kind of world will we live in where we can't trust anybody who's like in control of our lives? Like that's a very scary thought. But I'm still like able to understand that everybody has a motive. Everybody's putting information out there. Even when I like this podcast, we might not think we have a motive or be biased in some way, but what you choose to talk about, like what you have experienced, like that all does like influence your opinion.
I guess we're both from the Northeast.
Yeah.
Then we both moved to South Florida. So it's, you are limited by what's around you and your thoughts. So it's funny how people are so protective of their opinions. I guess it's almost being protective about like where they come from in a lot of ways.
We get a lot of our opinions from our families, even if we don't want to admit it, or our friends.
You eventually get back to your parents.
Yeah.
You become your parents.
Or your grandparents, or, like whatever they talk to you about.
Yeah. So now with, we have seen a dip in the coverage of Ukraine, which, like we said, is still obviously as important as it was a week ago, but now with less coverage, and now we're moving on to the Supreme Court crisis, which I don't really fully understand so before something happens in the Supreme Court, there's like a draft and like they internally prepare it and then they release that.
I guess it's almost like a paper where you like are working on, and you have like a peer review, and you have to like have it be accepted by your peers, and then once it is, then it can go into the journal. Like I guess that's how it is for the Supreme Court. Like once I know it had to do.
Are they all working with it? Like, are they all involved?
Well, yeah, I think so.
Or just the conservative ones?
Well, Alito was the one who wrote the opinion, and it has to do with that Mississippi case, the abortion case. So he doesn't have to like take away, Roe versus Wade altogether. He could just say like this one case in Mississippi we're gonna allow it, but we're not gonna like totally overturn it. But the way he wrote it completely sounds like no, like we don't like Roe versus Wade, like we're done with it.
That was convenient, I suppose.
But then they get to vote on it, and if everybody or like the majority votes with him, then it gets passed. I guess that's how it works.
Wow. So I think what's the makeup of it? I thought that there were like 4 of them that wanted it.
All the conservatives are for it. And I guess there's probably like the other side too. Like one of the Democrats probably wrote an opinion and they didn't get votes for it or something like that.
Wow. It's amazing how things work. I don't think a lot of people fully understand the mechanism.
It's like a panel that hears a case, and then both sides of the case decide to like write a paper and then they vote on it.
So if you're an activist judge, you can scour the country for a case that begs to bring up a pet cause. So
Well, they would have to bring it to your attention. It would have to reach the Supreme
yeah, they would have
Court.
to go through the.
But then, yeah, you can choose which ones you want to pick. I don't know, like how they. I'm sure they have to all work together on like a consensus of what they want to hear and what they don't. But
See, what I don't understand at this point is just how much of a done deal it is, like in terms of percentages.
well, we never know until we know, I guess,
Yeah.
until they make it official. But it would seem pretty unlikely that they wouldn't keep the same opinion because it did have like how people voted on the leaked document.
Wow.
I guess that's how they knew like where people stood. I'm pretty sure.
If you're one of those left-leaning judges right now, what a legacy, to have been the hope in that manner. I guess they're above politics. So.
Yeah.
So
You know what I think Democrats should do is that they need to play the conservative game and they need to like decide to outlaw abortion after a certain like time frame unless it's like really necessary.
I saw I think it was like Kentucky or something that might have did like 6 weeks. Like most women don't know that they're pregnant at 6
No,
weeks.
but
I think there was like 2
92
weeks that they could have had an abortion. But like
Yeah.
that, like technically like an abortion where like they go in and do the procedure.
Wait a second.
Like there was only 2 weeks where that would have been necessary. Previously they would just take a pill. And 2 weeks after the baby was too old to do it. So yeah, it seemed like that wasn't a real serious attempt at giving it. So yes, that's our episode about ancient civilizations and abortion laws, because topics are arbitrary here. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care.